So you need to get busy, but you need to also take your time before you make some long-term commitment. You need to walk through the healing journey before you make some long-term commitments. My name is Ken Njoroge. I've been married for 17 years, built a business over 17 years, have 5 kids, 3 of my own, 2 adopted. Cellulant is a payments company operating across Africa. So we have offices in 18 countries, serving 35 countries. We give merchants a single point of connection, a single point of contracting for payments, for collecting and making payments across Africa. We support about 240 payment types, everything from cards, mobile money, cash, and bank transfers, and so on, and different payment methods across Africa. We employ about 500 people across these markets, and we serve about 800 customers. And I think succession planning probably started from the very early phases of the business, right? And I think it was an intentional mindset to build a team and a company that could be able to outlast my departure. You got to consciously want that. And when you do that, then you go forth and build a team that typically is largely independent, right? And sort of, let me say, independently capable. So you hire people that are better than yourself in different areas. I think this is kind of a well-known and well-trodden path. But I think where it begins to get nuanced is that even when you hire that team, that you have to intentionally shift your management style to give them space to operate. And so I found, a couple of things really mattered. So it was very intentional that when people came to me with a problem, that I at some point I stopped rushing to give answers, right? And somebody would say, hey, there's this thing we're facing, whatever it is, and you would essentially sort of flip it back to them and say, okay, so what do you think we should do? Okay, why is this the best course of action? What does success look like? Okay, what mistakes have you made? Okay, fine. Have you done it before? Okay, no. You just say, go and try it. Don't worry too much about it. If something goes wrong, we'll all figure it out, right? So you give them permission to also get it wrong, and so on and so forth, right? It took quite some time and some intentionality to really understand that when you hired good people, that's what was required of you as a leader. In terms of sort of transitioning, in my story and in my journey, I probably would have stayed on in the business for about 3 to 4 years. That was my plan. In the end, I sort of transitioned a little earlier. What did I learn in that sort of journey of jumping off? I like to call it sort of jumping off the lion. I realized that you've got to accept actually that the company will be better without you, right? And you have to have a deep sense of conviction around it. And I did, and that was because of the sort of things that I've done over the years to build the company. The second one is actually, I got a therapist. I knew that it was a systemically large event in my life, and I needed help. And one of the first things my therapist told me is that, like, Ken, you've built this business. This is your 6th child. So it is going to be a process of grieving. And I think that gave me permission to sort of have these days when I woke up in the morning and I just wasn't sure that I'd done the right thing, right? Or woke up in the morning, didn't want to get out of bed, right? That context that I had, that, wow, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, this is actually grieving. It's like losing a child. And so that framework is very important. And the other thing that my therapist told me is that, look, you've got all kinds of covenants, all these kinds of agreements in your head that you have written with Cellulant. And in that agreement, Cellulant has promised you all sorts of things. And you've promised Cellulant all sorts of things. And one of the things that you've promised Cellulant is you never leave them. And say, now you need to unpack those covenants, and then you need to work through each one of them. It was a very powerful framework, right? So you are sort of not dealing with these nebulous feelings that you couldn't understand. You could generally say, okay, when you kind of went into week 2 and none of your customers were calling you, right? Like, there was a covenant that you had signed, and you had all these expectations which you now needed to unwind, right? So that was super important in the process of transitioning. And then the other thing was to rest and then get busy at some point. So you rest for just a good enough time and then get busy again. I think in my case, I probably rested sort of always in trucks or jammies for about 3 or 4 weeks. And by week 4, my children started to give me cues. They said, "So Dad, you're not going to work today. You're still in tracksuits." And that was the cue that, okay, I need to start to get busy again. And then what I did is I started to spend a lot of time with a lot of entrepreneurs. So you need to rest, super important. I don't think that it's absolutely a good idea to sort of jump from one thing to another. And then even then, I also almost made the wrong commitments during those periods, right? Because then you have this desire to want to get busy, desire to be wanted again, right? Because remember that sort of by week 4, you're very clear that your customers have moved on, your executive team have moved on, right? Like they're busy now settling their new CEO and so on and so forth. So you got that sort of hunger to feel wanted. And I almost committed to some boards. And when I look back in hindsight, I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? And so you need to get busy, but you need to also take your time before you make some long-term commitments. And you need to walk through the healing journey before you make some long-term commitments. I think those were some of the sort of tips out of my journey of building for succession and then the process of succession itself.